Okay, good evening. Thank you everyone for coming along. My name is Tom, I'm one of the members of the Canterbury Socialist Society, and it is my great pleasure to see so many of you here and to welcome our guest speaker for this evening. I'm just going to do a really quick intro, including a bit of admin stuff in case you don't know anything about us or what we do. So the Canterbury Socialist Society is a membership organisation that started in Canterbury around 6 years ago. Basically to do events like this, as well as social events, which we now do every month. We do one each. We do a lecture like this on the second Wednesday every month here at Space Academy. And Space Academy has hosted us for these for basically the entire time. So tonight, as every night, we're extraordinarily thankful for their hospitality there. And then the fourth Friday of every month, we also meet for social drinks from 6 p.m. onwards at Country Brewster. You're very much welcome to come along to any of that. It's all public. If you're not on the mailing list at the moment, there's a mailing list just over by the door. So if you want to know more about what we do, jump on there and you'll get information from us regularly. I think that's all. A couple more things. You'll also see that we've got a publication called Commonweal just over there. That's the most recent edition, the red one. We do ask for a $5 donation there, but if you're hard up or something, we'd rather you read it than just leave it there and if no one read it. So do feel free to grab one. Also, one of our members is involved in setting up the Aotearoa New Zealand branch of the Industrial Workers of the World at the moment. So there is some flyers over there, so feel free to grab some of them. It's got a website and you can find out more information about that. So moving to the proceedings tonight, what we're going to do is I'll quickly introduce Berkay, our speaker. He'll present a seminar for about 15 minutes. We'll break for about 10 to 15 minutes for a bit of a breather, grab a drink and stuff, and we'll come back with questions, which I'll be happy to field, and I'll take a speaking list and stuff. So yeah, please think of things and write them down so you won't forget them, and come back with some great questions. But in the meantime, I'm just really, really happy and really excited to welcome Berkay from Otago. Berkay is a political science doctoral researcher, originally from Türkiye, now based in New Zealand, after completing his PhD at the University of Waikato. And this evening, he's going to be talking about Sura Mao and some of his theories around youth compulsion, a theory that I hadn't actually come across until very recently, and hopefully from Berkay I've had a few primers to get at some grasp of what it's about. I think it will be really interesting, and we're very lucky that he's presented the seminar recently at the Historical Materialism Conference in Istanbul, so we're actually getting version 4 of the talk, I'm told, so that's great. You know, it's had a few goes at being polished, so that's really exciting for us. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I'm particularly curious around, you know, what is it that Mao's talking about with youth compulsion? What is it about economic power that acts in these, or operates in these subtle ways that sort of compel us to act in a particular way, and only that way, and how does that influence how we think about freedom, or what it would be to be free, what we need to change. So yeah, very happy to be welcoming Berkay this evening. So with no further ado, I think how about you all join me in welcoming Berkay.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you for everyone coming and inviting me. It's my first time in Canterbury Socialist Society, and I'm very excited to present this topic to you. So this is, as Tom said, not the first time I'm presenting on this, so I'm constantly developing and building up on this topic since I read Soren Mao's Youth Compulsion, which is the book that we're going to talk about today, as well as a few other books that came out after the post-pandemic period. I found it very influential to rethink on how Marxism approaches and conceptualizes capitalism's hegemony on us, on society. That's why social domination is something that we all thought about during the pandemic, and I think these are a few examples like Mao and the other books like Canterbury that we're gonna go over and share. So there are lots of visuals in this presentation because I'm now a lecturer that has enough experience that to understand when people are getting bored. I try to visualize everything. So if you see a slide with lots of text in it, don't force yourself to read it, especially if you're in the back, but concentrate on what I'm telling about that text and that visual that's coming up. So firstly about me, that's me. I define myself early career scholar who's trying to do something with political economy, who studied all political theory, and who has a general interest in so-called materialism. And I'm trying to find an intersection between them. So during my studies, I concentrate on Ellen Marxist Wood's works on political thought, history of political thought writing, and try to identify why Marxism didn't have any deal with history of political thought writing in the political science discipline. And the answer was with Ellen Marxist Wood. She introduced this new method together with husband Neil Wood, Social History of Political Theory. It's a method that I try to systematize in my doctoral studies as well, and that allowed me to actually invest in many fields, as these are some 3 of them, but there are other ones, and that allowed me to actually get a bigger interest in Soren Mao's work as well. So these are 2 main books that I'm going to talk about today. So first one I just showed you, Soren Mao's Mute Compulsion. And the other one I find very important is Heidegger Sternberger's recently translated book, Marketing Violence. This book I care about because it has so much historical investigation about capitalism and how capitalism functions throughout history together with violence and compulsion. So these books actually, I think, they supply each other in a way that we can use a better understanding of social domination of capitalism. I start with unpacking about Mao a bit. So Mao had this book as a doctoral thesis as well, and he developed to an article, then he developed into a book. Actually, this is the second version of his book, so the earlier version was published in 2019, something like that, and this one is 2023. So it's like 4 years of development of the first version of the book. And there are very critical chapters in the beginning of the book talking about and conceptualizing capitalism also as a power system rather than just an economic system. And the main question actually is an intersection of the Heidegger, Sternberger, and Mao is how does capitalism manage to sustain its grip on social life, and how is it even possible that a social order so volatile and hostile to life can persist for centuries? And this is a question, very actual question, especially if you think of the pandemic. So pandemic was a period where there was huge disruptions of capital's circulation of capital, goods, and labor. They were all in lockdowns. There was like lots of supply chain disruptions. That brought out lots of other problems about supply chain management, and we had an inflationary wave following the post-pandemic period, and that triggered lots of things that actually, in normal sense, if it happened in, I don't know, in the 1970s, maybe earlier, would have probably provoked larger social criticism and larger social movements challenging capitalism, why it is existing, why is it leaving us in this really vulnerable position where we suffer from a general public health issue, where we suffer from inflation, hardships, those kind of difficulties. And this the same question actually, it's not a new question, so firstly, but when you think of pandemic, I think it becomes very actual again, it reactivates itself. That's why I chose this topic actually from my Marxist political theory coverage. As I said, lots of text. I'm trying not to concentrate on the text, but try to bridge what I say. So this aspect of capitalism, how it dominates social life, is actually, you can find lots of examples of how Marx thought the same question. So one of his main ideas is to discover the equilibration and concentration of property in the hands of the capitalist class, and he systematizes the capital this by conceptualizing the extraction of surplus value from the proletariat, plus profiting from that, and of course the growth and expansion of capital. But if you look more deeper, beyond the conventional outlook, we see Marx trying to find the capitalist system and trying to introduce capitalist system as an alien power, which confront human beings as something external. We understand this from his manuscripts, his Grundrisse, and some earlier works before Capital. He's trying to understand the phenomenon of capital as something that changed human nature. He does this in a very systematic way, and through introducing the analytical tools that capitalism introduced, and one of them is the power of money, of course. And he uses this power concept as in German Macht, but also as Herrschaft in Gewalt, which is referring to dominance and hegemony as well, and coercion, so compulsion. In the manuscripts, he tries to discover the capitalist mode of production and how workers' chance of appropriation of his working conditions is lessened, so that worker or people losing control of their lives through capitalism evolving. So capitalism is also, in these key points, we can say that it's also enforcing the power relation, because it's changing the nature of how human beings are living, and it's making people lose their control of their working conditions, which is an access how they reproduce their life. Well, the historical materialism, or the first wave of historical materialists, like started with Engels, Kautsky, Bernstein, Plehanow, Lenin, all this first wave historical materialists, Marxists, after Marx's death, especially with Kautsky, it's very significant, but we see that Marxism is systematized as a doctrine which offered a quite technicist conception of economy, how economy evolves in different stages and how it changes social conditions. And Engels started canonizing social materialism as a method. So, especially after the death of Marx, we see this more prominently, although there are examples like in German ideology. We see Marx and Engels trying to understand history through different stages of production. And even earlier than that, Marx in his manuscripts, 1944 manuscripts, trying to identify different historical stages through how alienation takes place. We see this starting with Engels, this canonization, and continuing with Kautsky, Bernstein, who had a large control on the accessing Marx's writings back then, because not all of Marx and Engels' writings were published, especially in the late 19th century. They were most popularly published during the early years of the Soviet Union, and then people, for example, learned that there was a text existed, the name is German Ideology, in 1932. That was the first publication. Until that time, Kautsky and Bernstein, they moderated the writings that are not published, and they allowed some of them to be published in the German newspapers, and some of them circulating around intellectual circles. And they considered historical materialism of Engels and Marx as an evolutionary model of historical progress. especially Bernstein was in this wing. He even largely systematized all Marxist philosophy as something evolutionary. Plekhanov and Lenin were polemicking with Kautsky mostly, especially Plekhanov, and then Lenin taking over and revising Plekhanov's inaccurate points and trying to involve into polemics with Kautsky. He counter-argued, emphasizing the role of the human subject in the making of history. This was a book of Plekhanov, and Lenin emphasized it enough that history is not only something external, evolutionary, but also something human subject can contribute to the making. But at the end, the historical development during this era, in these polemics, was described as the contradictions between productive forces and relations of production. It's quite a, still classic definition. But within this first wave of historical materialists, they were still considering economy to be a separate entity, a substructure, infrastructure that engages with other dimensions of life. Now, there are other things that I can discuss here, but let's go on because it's quite a long presentation, so I don't want to stop here. One of the other answers how this reproduction of capitalism is still continuing was explained through the theories of state. So state theorists, especially during the early 20th century, actually connected it to the late 19th century. They explained how capitalism continues its hegemony through explaining the state and how state actually shows its being an instrumental apparatus, an instrumental power as a tool of bourgeoisie. And these theories were developed most prominently by theorists like Baran and Suizi and Ilde Ferdinand and Lenin. They attracted attention to how capitalism monopolizes and uses state as a central tool to kind of enforce its hegemony. And this was very evident in the era of imperialism. So imperialism, Lenin defined as the highest stage of capitalism. And all their writings, Ilde Ferdinand and Lenin and late 19th century state theorists, was attracting attention to how the environment was militarized, how there was lots of violence, First World War, you can say, and lots of corruption of the social democratic parties of the era, aligning with the war collaborators or war governments. So they were attracting attention to these very striking and important themes, to be honest, but they reflected the era of how state was quite visibly showing its external power, coercion. And Baran and Suizi built up on that. In 1960s, they attracted attention to how competition and monopolization plays a role in how state power is being reproduced. And lastly, more recently, David Harvey was talking about the neoliberalism as being the stage responding to absence of competition. And neoliberalism's main task was to revive the competition in capitalism, because during the past era, the golden age or the Keynesian era, is state monopolization, and monopolization in the capitalism allowed larger industrial organizations of capitalism, which reflected very similarly to monopolization state. So these theories were built up and improved in the 1970s. So there were theories building on more or deepening the level of our understanding of the space superstructure model, how different dimensions of capitalism being the base of superstructure, or how productive forces can actually be a real will of changing these relations. There were discussions of overcoming the classical Marxist social democratic welfare theories of state, like the German state derivation debate. There were debates on the conceptual gulf between the economic and the political. So this was one of the things that maybe we can go on in the question part. We might have heard about the state debate taking place between Poulantzas and Miliband, and some of the Althusser's emphasis on reproduction of power through instruments of state and ideology, and more recently, Bob Jessup tried to explain it through the existence of a social elite to dominate workers. Simon Clark attracted attention to capitalism being a theory of social relation, and we see the course of power of capital has been identified and conditioned to state a lot. There were others who did condition it to ideology. So ideology was another very strong leg of how capitalism reproduces its hegemony. And some argued, like some of them you see here, they explain it reproduces power through affecting the concepts, imaginaries, myths, narratives that we consciously or unconsciously represent, interpret, and understand as a social reality. And ideology is defined as a socially determined thought, how we think, distinguished from violence, coercion. So, not always coercion, but we sometimes see it, and sometimes they explain it actually all the time. We see it as something like a consent-making mechanism. And Western Marxism invested on this leg of the theory, Marxist theory, a lot. We saw George Lucas, Antonio Gramsci, Theodore Adorno, old Frankfurt School, Louis Althusser. We see these kind of names. We see Korsch as trying to reinterpret the value theory of Marx to identify how it creates an ideological hegemony that actually reproduces itself. And Western Marxism, in a large extent, excluded this kind of economic power of capital out of the analysis. Or some of them, like Althusser or Gramsci, they attracted enough attention to how it continues with state as well. So state and ideology actually going together, not one or other. But they largely excluded how, as a market relation, it continues. Returning to Marx, what was essential in Marx, what we need to rethink or remember, I think Mao reminds us in the earlier chapters of the book, that his initial thing was to reject the idea economy is an ontologically separate sphere of society, governed by its own distinctive economic logic. This was a response to the British political economist Ricardo Adam Smith and others that tried to identify the market as a constitutive force of history and production. And Marx's other thing was to develop a critique of the entire theoretical ideological field of mainstream British political economy, field we call the first point, and eventually develop a theory which would unravel social relations in these economic categories, the categories that are explained through the existence of economy. And when capitalist economy is not considered as a system of power, he attracted attention that the free market is presented as the economic totality, the invisible hand, or something that balances itself, creates things like a God. And power relationships that it establishes actually becomes very invisible if Marx attracts attention. So if capitalism is defined as a social ontological propositions concerning what must be the case in any form of society, historical generalization of the commodity form becomes very prominent, like in Hegel. And dialectical reconstruction of the essential structures and dynamics of the capitalist mode of production for certain transhistorical features and certain historically specific facts. So, very important thing that I think Mao tries to systematize or theorize in the book is this part. That let's go very basics and try to understand how capitalism actually exists, how it exists itself on society, social ontology, basically. I did this one, very amateur attempt of trying to identify the market dependency here. So, Al talks about this more systematically. I try to visualize it very easily. So what he's talking about is that we need to identify capitalism through how it separates us from our life conditions. Right? And it basically emerges as like a pyramid or a mountain that we need to go through every time to basically reach our social reproduction activities. It's like sleeping, living, recreational activities, shopping, feeding ourselves, enjoying ourselves. And every time through accessing this, as workers, we need to sell our labor, to allow our labor to be commodified, and through that only we can access our social reproduction. And at the same time, this creates a market dependency between us and the life conditions. And every time we try to go over this pyramid or mountain, or whatever we want to call, and turn around. And where we start, we don't always start from the bottom. According to our education, our qualities, whatever we inherited, we start from different stairs of this pyramid or mountain, different levels. And some of us are lucky enough to start from the very top positions. And some of us are actually owning these means of production that creates this market. And the important point here that Mao attracts attention is that even we sell our labor, before we sell our labor, we are actually conditioned to do it. How? So, think of you graduating from university and the next day nobody knocks your door and tells you you have to work. Okay? But you feel to work because that's somehow you try to exist yourself. You're kind of in a debt relation because you have to sell your labor to continue your activities, to continue to reproduce yourself. So this is kind of a determination, in a way, that the market creates. So actually, before you selling your labor, it owns the conditions that you sell your labor as well, by establishing this market dependency on society. All right, we will return here. What these theories of ideology and state achieve is to explain the large dimension of how capital reproduces itself. But there is also this market dependency issue that they didn't touch much, actually, until very recently. And that's what Mao tries to explain, to identifying capitalism owning also an economic power. These are some theories more recently emerged, some traditions or theories or approaches to Marxism, trying to conceptualize certain aspects of this market dependency or market power that we call. One of them is the value form theory, and mostly taking place through the Neue Marx lecture. And we see the promotion of Marxism as a critique of political economy rather than an alternative political economy. So that allows us to think through what Marx was reading and what Marx was responding exactly. And that allowed us to expand more on the concepts of how this market thing is alienating us, kind of emerging as something alien that is disrupting us and the life conditions. Political Marxism, I'm quite interested in this one, is also very interested in identifying this market dependency. And we see that the contributors of this tradition aim to reject economism, like Marx did, like I showed you earlier, as transhistorical laws that explain capitalism as a constitutive and necessary stage of human progress, and they attract attention to notions of extra economic coercion. So capitalism emerged something as an alienating thing, but also happened through not with all the time consent, with everyone's will, but happened through violence a lot. So it forced people to obey its hegemony as well. And we see this theories of market dependence. So we'll go on this again at the end. But Marxist feminism is another quite strong branch, I can say, that tried to explain this market dependency or market power through identifying the relationship between the formal economy and social reproduction. So how at the same time there's an invisible exploitation taking place, especially in the household, through different genders, through the labor of women. Marxist ecology did a good contribution on identifying the relationship between the capitalist economy and how it dominates nature, and why it wants to dominate the nature as well. There are recent books try to systematize Marx. They were controversial, like Kohei Saito's Degrowth Communism. It's very controversial what he's saying there, but it shows enough that intellectually that Marx thought about this concept of how capitalism tries to dominate nature and why it aggressively wants to do it. We can talk about that maybe later. But the essential thing is, capitalist economy is something very material, justifies itself through relation between economic forms and concrete material world, and tries to establish a dominance on the nature as well as the workers of human beings who need to test out their labor. And lastly, the labor process theory. So they try to explain how this market power exists through identifying how we become like lords and peasants in a workplace. This is just an exaggeration, but they're saying basically that in the workplace, no one is capitalist, everyone is in a feudal context. The owners of, your boss is basically a lord. He has privileges, no one can touch him, no one can judge him. Hierarchically, you need to go through everything unless you're being, I don't know, humanely violated or something. And you as a producer, you're like in the same condition as peasants. Nobody kills you, but everyone wants to work and produce something that they will appropriate later on. So it's basically very feudal inside the workplace. Workplaces, this fancy ethics and rules, of course, but in essence, they are very symbolic. So these five main traditions, and many more actually, try to identify different aspects of this economic power, or market power, or guilt compulsion, as Mao says. But that wasn't the attempt to kind of comprehensively understand and systematically conceptualize this market power. And what Mao tries to do here is this, actually, and this is just the first attempt. Not his first attempt, actually. There are other attempts, of course, in different levels. That's why I found it very important to visualize that this power of capitalism comes from these three legs. Coercion, the theories of state, how it uses the state as a coercive instrument, how it convinces people with ideological sphere, and how it dominates everything through the market dependency. So these don't exist alone, so they exist at the same time, together, and they come out when the other fails to respond to important problem or a disruption. So if there is like let's imagine of a crisis that people start to question the hegemony of the system, raises a social criticism. The first thing comes out is and in this stage, of course, we assume that people start to question why they're working for the system. Okay? And let's say the market power is basically being questioned. And the first thing comes here is this ideological attempt to reproduce legitimacy of capitalist system. So you start to hear from media and for other instruments of the system trying to legitimize capitalism as the only system that was successfully established continuously, cannot be reached beyond it. And even it fails, then there's no ideological trust to capitalism, then we see social criticism's level is rising, and we see the coercive power of the state. So they exist at the same time, they become visible in different stages, different times. So there are important Marxist contributors that try to understand the market power in this way that as Mao tried to do, and try to understand how this domination goes on with the class concept, class dominations. The mainstream economics always talk about market providing opportunities. So capitalism is something that's ultimate. So that's emergence was a natural and necessary process, and it historically happened, and it was the best thing came into the world. They explain it like that. One of the traditions that I explained earlier, political Marxism, was one of the deeper critiques of this explanation of this argument, attracting attention to historical reasons to transform the capitalist relations market dependency needed to be created. So they attract attention to how in feudalism peasants resist not to become market dependent, actually, so they didn't welcome the capitalist production. They were subjected to it through quite powerful violence, dispossession, and delocation. Silvio Federici, for example, attracted attention to how women are dispossessed and targeted during this process when capitalism introduces itself as a necessary process of this market dependency, or less. Well, Wood conceptualized as a class as a relation between exploiters or exploited or appropriators or producers, and showed us through the historical examples actually market dependency built on this appropriation and exploitation and took different historical forms. And class domination refers to the relationship between those who are actually excluded from the direct access to conditions of social reproduction, like I showed in the earlier visual here. We are not accessing it easily without selling our labor, and who are controlling the conditions of social reproduction, accessing the social reproduction. So capital relation is a relation of also a compulsion. Some attract attention how this power is quite impersonal, so we cannot easily characterize or associate this power with people or rulers, like happened in feudalism or pre-capitalist forms of social organization. Heidegger is one of the names that we're going to talk about in this topic as well, but there are attempts from social theory try to identify this capitalist relation is not based on the personal relation, it's very impersonal, and it's about the domination of the economic power rather than the personal power of the certain ruler. The individual is not a residue of the dissolution of the pre-capital social bonds, it is a socially constituted form of subjectivity, and it's a procure between need and object, Steinberg said that the modern state as a bourgeois state exists with impersonal character. Hart and Negri tried to build on the concept of this empire and said, define the empire as some kind of a transcendental plane of power. Nobody controls it directly, but there was something like a Foucaultian governmentality that's kind of dominating. Agamben built on Foucault, saying that power is a transcendent and biopolitics is a form of kind of dominating this. And the economic power of capital rests upon the ability of capital to seize life by roots and entangle it to the logic of valorization of commodification. So it's quite impersonal as well. So that's why one of the things is to fight with this market dependency, we cannot find anyone to directly to address because there's no one, actually. Mao talks about how this market dependency universalizes itself as well. So the mainstream tradition in Marxism conceives the relations of domination in capitalism in terms of a class domination. A certain bourgeoisie exists, it exploits the state, and they reduce the power of capital to the power of the capitalist class. So that's definitely not wrong. And Mao says that they're explaining the vertical relations of this hegemony, this domination, but there is also another horizontal dimension of it that I'm going to come now. But before, Werner Bonafeld says that it refers to the universal domination of value, how capitalism subsumed class relations and the fetishistic inversions of social relations. V.C. Roberts says that on connection between value and class, says that he denies the class domination only as exploitation in the workplace. It is also referring class domination. He's also referring to class domination as a transformed form of universal domination. So Mao says that capitalist class domination is mediated by also horizontal relations on top of the vertical relations. So there's the pyramid, but we are not also in the same line. We are, as workers, are subjected to a horizontal relationship, horizontal power relationship that we are subjected to capitalists by means of a mechanism of domination, which simultaneously subjects everyone to the imperative of capital. Everyone basically, as a worker, tries to compete with each other, compete with different ways of reaching access to capital to reproduce their life. That's a natural force. I'll come to this later, actually. We talked about Heidegger Steinberg as impersonal power, so it's one of the books of her as well. So what she does is that she goes back to history and tries to identify how this impersonalization became evident. Examines the bourgeois state, wielding power through abstract legal and institutional mechanisms rather than personal rule, goes back to historical specificities of bourgeois state, goes back to the role of state in market formations, and tries to identify it through very concrete historical examples that no other theorist that much did, actually. She spends enormous time, so I wish I had a print copy of her book because it's like a brick like this. Even talking about some key concepts, she has to visit maybe 3-4 important contexts that she examined through history, so real historical work there. Other thing, the more recent one, is about how market and violence goes together. Like I explained, nobody welcomed capitalism as a more progressive stage of production. Not necessarily. It transformed and enforced working producers and workers to become subject to this dominance and hegemony. And Heidegger Steinberg visits competition, takes the competition as a generator of transgenerational violence and looks back history through this, trying to identify when this competition becomes very evident in emerging capitalist markets and through the market dependency. She finds three very important connections that I might go over a little bit. She finds it firstly in the naval competition between imperializing powers. She finds out that the emerging market relations are dominating, started to shape the context that they're emerging in, and actually extracting a lot of violence through their imperialistic activities, through colonization, of course. During the colonization, of course, between each other, they're also competing, and they show the competition through this naval competitions, naval conflicts. She historically visits them, another very important thing that shows exactly how market dependency actually shows itself in history is the post-feudal contract wage relationships. So she visits the eras of slavery, when slavery was abolished. She argues that in most of the contexts in continental Europe, although slavery or serfdom was abandoned or abolished, we see a continuation of this domination through the contract relations. So you're now not a serf, but a worker. That seems like an improvement. You have a contract now. At the same time, exiting this contract makes you sentenced to life. Then you have a written document, of course, but it's not easy to exit it or finish the thing there. And Gerstenberger exactly emphasizes this is something like capitalism inherited and internalized in its market dependency as well. So capitalism not only distinguished through the rise of economic power, but also resembles through how it integrates violence and coercion into these new social relations emerging with this market dependency. Right. Maybe we talk about this in the question part a little bit more, but before coming to that, actually, this part is now relevant. So we talked about horizontal relations, how workers compete with each other and subject to capital in different levels that changes their sorting according to the system. There are theories, Marxist theories, approach this puzzle actually. So how we conceptualize class, and after we conceptualize classes, how we identify intra-class positions. And these are emerging with some, of course, discussions on identity and gender and the forms of exploitation happening in more micro levels compared if we consider the class level as macro. And how these micro levels are historically constituted and inherited by capitalism, and how capitalism internalized and continued them as a form of exploitation to divide actually the competing workers from each other so that they cannot unite for a categorical ontological rejection of capitalism and dependency. There's Aruza, Lebowitz, Bhattacharya, and Shiver recently more theorizing on writing more about this, and Lebowitz of the past, but others are continuing to write on this. So the basic point, as Lebowitz says, the capitalist tendency to divide workers to discipline and control the proletarian starting point, making it extremely difficult to basically workers to unite categorically against capitalist market dependency. Right. Now we can come to the final part where we can talk about overcoming economic power of capital. So if it's this powerful, if it's setting all the conditions that we can, access all social reproduction, how can we basically defeat it? How can we overcome it? So Mao has late chapters in his book talking about some vulnerable points of capitalist market dependency. One of them is logistics, other one is surplus value. There's also food chapter, which I enjoy a lot. But I think I found the logistics very important. It's a very good example. So he argues that capitalism is extremely vulnerable to external dynamics for crisis. Not only Mao, actually, it was a point of Mike Davis, who passed last year, also saying the same thing. Capitalism shows its power when you try to disrupt the circulation of capital, labor, and commodities. Especially this is evident, for example, in challenges it receives through when you threaten logistic circle, an important strategic point like a port, an airport, or a road. There's an immediate appearance or a reaction through coercive power of the state, because they just give up, they just skip the concept, ideological levels, they just respond to you immediately with physical force to eject you from that disruption. This is due to, Mao explains, the strategic importance. So capitalism is extremely powerful, protecting these strategic things, but it shows it's actually extremely vulnerable as well, because if you target very strategically, you can actually disrupt the circulation of capital goods and labor, then you can actually threaten its ontological existence very easily. So considering internal contradictions of capitalism to ground a path to consider the power of capital is something very important. Of course, we need to be very careful about avoiding to reduce the power of capital to power of capitalist class, like the very traditional attempts did. So capitalism doesn't go away when you just eliminate the bourgeoisie. So you have to get rid of the market dependency here, so that you can replace them with some kind of a different social organization. Now attracts attention to that, and you can see the power of capitalism, of course, the global coercion. So capitalism now is very globalized through neoliberal era, and actually you can threaten its strategic vulnerability from any part of the world if you target enough. So if you think strategically enough and threaten this global circulation of goods, capital, and labor. And nonetheless, the last thing is, it's very important how capital seizes the labor. We discussed so far about it, but it also seizes the nature. Okay, why? Because nature is the way that we can actually alternatively access our social reproduction. Okay? So, in order to prevent that, capitalism aggressively attacks nature, environment, to block an alternative attempt from working class to come and reproduce excessive social production. That's why any attempt against nature is actually part of the struggle. Okay? Any attempt in the environment is actually included in the package that we need to adopt for overcoming the economic power of capital, because it is something categorically capitalism as an offensive one. Okay. Maybe I passed this one. So what are the impacts of these two works in the post-pandemic period about our contemporary Marxist political theory? So I define Marxist political theory through three legs: ideology, state, and market power. I join Mao here a lot. Here I talked about political Marxism a bit because this presentation was initially about how it has impacts on political Marxism, but I can generalize it easily saying that Marxism here. So provides Marxism with a systematic theory of economic power, firstly, these two books, and Gerstenberger discovers it in the historical examinations, investigations. It contextualizes early attempts of defining economic power of capital, like the Wood's separation of economic from the political in capitalism, like the market dependency debate, like the Brenner's concept of politically constituted property. It also has an impact on capitalism, identifying capitalist internal relations that are constitutively defined. So change in social property relations, for example, to call for a dynamic paradigm to revitalize the significance of relations of production. Here I talked about a bit about the rules of reproduction debate, which is not that relevant actually, but what we can say that political Marxism had its attempts to overcome the same problem actually in a way academically failed, and Mao's contribution just very significant for the points that I reached in this discussion. I won't go too much on that. Lastly, so those who are interested in the political Marxism issues of this, so they can join the Twitter community that I'm running as well. So they share the latest literature, including Mao's book, Gerstenberger, and other ones that had an impact on the Marxist political theory, especially in the post-pandemic era. So those are interested to join there as well. So this was my overview. So we can maybe continue with questions and comments if you have any. The main point was to identify economic power of capital as a third leg to the theories that we know about state and ideology from the Marxist political theory. This is a more recently discovered and systematized part of Marxist political theory, and I think it's very crucial and historically important for us to kind of go over it, learn more about it, develop it in a way that can make sense with lots of discussions that we're having intellectually. So thank you for everyone listening. Hopefully I was good in time. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Berkay. As promised, we'll have a quick 10-minute break and then we'll come back for questions. So have a little think about what you'd like to ask, and I'll be taking the speaking list and stuff.
Put yourself back to being you would have known the system was violent.
Yes. But he's right about the horizontal choice. When you're in the throes of your until you come across skirts. And then